I want to welcome everybody to another episode of Memories of Us. And today we got a very special guest. This woman has been through it all. You talk about prison and abusive relationships, addiction, things like that. Her journey is amazing, and her artwork is just phenomenal. And we'll get into it. So today's guest is Elizabeth. Elizabeth, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell people where you're from.
I am from Bangor, Maine.
Awesome, awesome. Now, can you tell people about your journey to getting where you are? Because we was talking before, and I tell you, we could have talked forever. Uh, and so, I mean, that was just phenomenal. And so, tell people about your journey. About your childhood.
I was adopted, and my parents moved up to Maine when my dad got a job at the University of Maine when I was like a toddler, and I went to the local Bangor area schools, and I had a pretty good childhood. My parents worked with a lot of musicians, and they put shows on, and so I got a lot of different culture influences, and it was a lot of fun, having seeing the different performers from all over the place. When I was 18, I got pregnant with my daughter, and ended up in some really abusive relationships early on in my early adult years. I got assaulted by my ex, and my skull was showing when it happened. So when I went to the hospital, they had to sew the muscle back and sew the skin back. And then they told me I was pregnant with my son. And they prescribed me opioids, and they said I was on too small of a dose to get addicted. We all know that's a lie now.
Mhm.
Years later, after hundreds of thousands of people have overdosed and tragically fall into the epidemic of addiction. And when I tried to refuse they put me in the pain clinic because my blood pressure kept skyrocketing, and they wanted me on a steady prescription of opioids. And when I tried to refuse, they told me refusing this medical advice could result in a call to Child Protective Services, where I was refusing medical treatment. So it really felt unfair to me. And by the time I had my son, the abuse kept getting worse, the trauma kept getting worse, and I wasn't pregnant anymore. So I started taking them more often, and I'd kind of go back and forth from I don't want to be on this, and they can't make me, to well, they're telling me to, and I'm in pain, so I'm going to take, the addiction plays all these games with your mind. So it my life got significantly worse, and then I finally went to the battered women's shelter in Bangor called Spruce Run, and they turned me away with two beds open. Well, first they told me, because I had no emotion, I was in complete shell shock. He had tortured me for hours in my own bathroom, and I was traumatized. I mean, let me put it this way: the next guy that put his hands on me after that relationship, I ended up assaulting him and putting him in the hospital because I picked something up. I finally snapped and went into battered women syndrome. And, that was the point I was at. Like, I had no tears left. I was just like hardened shell shock. And they basically said I was lying because most women come in crying. And then when they talked to police, they completely did a 180 and said my situation was too dangerous and my injuries were too extensive, that it put the other women in the shelter in danger. So I was turned away from the shelter, and that was pretty much rock bottom for me, to protect my kids from this situation. And I didn't want to take them around on the street where I had, this abuser after me. So I signed them over to be with my dad. That's when I lost my health insurance. In the state of Maine at that time, you could only get health insurance, through the state if you had kids. The second, I had signed temporary guardianship over, like, that was it. So there was no help, there was no rehab, there was no, anything, to get better. And, since I had been turned away, like, I had drug dealers helping me, protecting me, giving me a place to stay, you know, giving me work to make money with. And like, it was just this spiraling, journey for me where no matter what I did, no matter what I tried, like I just couldn't get out of this, quicksand I was in. And eventually I went to prison. I got conspiracy charges with the feds for drugs, and I got 3 years. In that, I'm grateful for it now because it, really opened my eyes to the truth about this country and, how much white supremacy is still prevalent and it's systematic. The system's doing exactly what it was designed to do. My generation did what we were supposed to. We went to college. When we had anxiety or depression, we went to our doctors. When we had injuries, we went to our doctors, and they gave us opioids. They gave us Xanax. They gave us, all of these ADHD medications that are really addictive. And then they put us all in prison when we got addicted to these drugs.
Yeah.
And so, we make up 20% of the incarceration population globally. America only makes up 5% of the world population. And yet we have 20% of the incarceration population. Like, this is about money. A hospital saves $350,000 a year contracting their laundry to go be washed by inmates instead of paying workers.
Yeah.
So it's follow the money. This is why there are so many people in prison, because they get free work. It's a free workforce for these corporations instead of helping people. And then they want to call it rehabilitation. I saw more abuse and more awful things in there than anyone should see. My first week at Somerset County, I watched an entire pod of women get stripped out because a male sergeant wanted a list of who shaved their vaginas and who didn't. The ones that did got written up. Like, that's what sex traffickers do. Like, to quote Britney Spears, like, that is what sex traffickers do. You are stripping women out to, dictate how they groom themselves.
That's crazy.
And that was like the PG-13 stuff.
Whoa. Inmates coming in there. When I was in prison, we're not even going to go that route. But you're right. The system is designed. It is doing exactly what it's designed to do. Now, I am happy to see that a lot of people starting to pay attention to the pipelines that are going through from schools to prisons and from all these different places, right? And it's crazy that you said something real interesting, how they got you addicted to these drugs and then put you in prison for being addicted to the drugs. And I've seen all of that. I was around during the crack epidemic, At the time when that came around, I was already, that was 90s. So I was already in my early 20s, so it was like, whoa. And to see all of that and to see how it's all changed now it's heroin and meth and fentanyl. Where's this stuff coming from?
It's all synthetic drugs too, and fentanyl.
Yeah, where is it coming from? Because, holy crap.
Well, bath salts, it's funny you say that, because bath salt and all these synthetic drugs were coming from China. And my crime happened in 2011, but a couple years before that is when America got in trillions of dollars of debt with China. And then all of a sudden, a couple years later, all of these synthetic drugs are like coming in through the mail. There are all these people ordering it over the mail. And, they'll call me a conspiracy theorist and, that I'm a drug addict and I'm crazy. And that's fine. I can take it. But I just think it's a little weird how, the timeline of things that happen. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. For every time they get rid of one drug, it's like they come up with 10 more synthetic drugs to replace them that are worse than the ones that they was. I'm like, so there's
exactly.
How it's troublesome, because coming from someone who does recovery work with men as well, I've seen it, and it's always been the question, right? Because you get some of these men, I've seen men overdose as well. But the children that are around, I've seen the numbers are just out of this world when it comes down to the addiction and suicides with them.
We
And
had 7 overdoses in one day.
yeah, see, that's what I was. That is crazy. And now
And Bangor is not very big.
I know I like we talked before. I've been to Bangor. I was staying at the motel right across from the Walmart.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just right off the highway there, right?
Yeah.
And then went up further to the peak where they got the little restaurant up there. Was able to go out there and watch the whales come across the cliffs right there, right? I thought it was beautiful, because I have family out there, and so it was beautiful. And but it snows too much. Mm-mm,
Yeah,
it
it's
snows too
cold.
much. Not- Summertime, awesome. Wintertime, no. Mm-mm. You
Yeah.
gotta get what you're
Well,
saying.
Bangor's definitely changed. We have 9 homeless encampments now in Bangor. It is insane. And like that's another thing. Like there's 29 empty properties for every homeless man, woman, and child in America. And that's me playing capitalistic devil's advocate because
Mm,
other sources said it was like 32, even 35. Like there it was 3 empty houses for every homeless man, woman, and child before the pandemic. And
oh,
now it's this insane number. Like the I mean, the difference between the rich and the poor, the wealth discrepancy, it's the same as, when the French Revolution popped off.
mm, that is there's a lot to take apart in this country in order to,
Yeah.
because you realize that the system don't work for some people, and the Jim Crow laws are still very prominent. We see it nowadays with the way the police violence is, right? We see it in the prison systems. We see it, in the school systems, for the most part. And so I think it's going to take a lot for us to have to really go back in there, deconstruct
Right.
all of these things, maybe
Right.
retrain the police as well, right?
Yeah.
Um, because I know I'm tired of seeing it, and I know everybody
Yeah.
else is tired of seeing it. And when they talk about privilege over here, and all of these things, it's very, very prominent. And being a black man in America, I can tell you firsthand, I've never had so many guns pulled on me throughout my whole entire life. I'm surprised I'm not in a mental institution somewhere.
It's scary. Having a gun pulled on you is scary.
Well, yeah. I mean, after a while, I mean, depending on the person,
Right.
depending on the individual, when you come from backgrounds like us, you pull a gun on, we just kind of look at them after a while because it's like,
Yeah, you better pull it or
yeah,
you better, yeah,
you're
because
gonna have
some
to do something, right? You're gonna have to do
yeah.
something. um, let's talk about your art though. Yeah, it's real interesting. Were you always artistic when you was a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I really love music too, and I
Mm,
sing. But yeah, I took a lot of painting classes in high school, and I when my life fell apart, obviously I wasn't really doing anything artistic. But then when I got to prison, I would hustle, I would paint people's cups and, cover them with floor wax so it wouldn't wash off. And I'd give people like kind of a sense of their identity back. But I also painted murals for some of the institutions I was in. I got like $56 a month. I had one of the highest paying jobs in the prison, like for
wow.
painting murals. And so, I
That's
mean, that
awesome.
was cool. And since I've been out, I've had some art shows. I had my first one was during Addiction Awareness Month during the pandemic, and
Mm,
that was really cool. And I joined the Bangor Art Society for a little bit and did some shows with them. Um, but I also found a company called Le Galeriste, and they transform your paintings into an environmentally friendly clothing brand. So now I have this really pretty brand with all my paintings on it, and it comes in plus sizes. Like I was super psyched about that because I want to be inclusive to everybody. Like
mm,
I want women of all body types, or the feminine. If you embody the feminine anything, this brand is for you.
mm,
I mean, it's very, I want people to feel empowered, like they could walk through hell and take on the devil if they had to, wearing these clothes.
yeah.
And I just got a $10,000 grant, so I'm gonna have my inventory in some of the downtown Bangor shops after the first of the year, and then I'm going to do vendor shows. But I do have a portal website where you can, purchase the stuff.
Okay. We'll definitely talk more about that. I wrote down some questions and you pretty much just answered them all. I was like, oh. I mean, wow. You see this? I did my research and you just totally blew me out the water. Now, that's something that someone asked me. Now, when did you really start finding yourself in prison? Because I read your article about it, right? And so when did you really start finding yourself? Because we did talk about how when you left prison, the guards and everything end up getting arrested.
Yep. I was at Alderson, West Virginia, and my bid got a lot better. I was out of county, and I wasn't in an institution where they were constantly targeting me. So I kind of kept my head down, and but there were other women, like I get manic from whatever mental health diagnosis they hit me with. And I'd have nights where I'd stay awake, and sometimes there would be a couple girls that would come in at random times, and they'd go right to the shower and just cry. And I always had this gut feeling like something was wrong. But you don't go ask people. Like, you don't ask, if someone's having a bad day, you just leave them alone. If they want to tell you, they'll tell you. Like, that's just, kind of proper prison etiquette. Right. You don't pry. And then, there were other rumors going around and just, weird things on the compound. And after I got out, it hit the papers that the captain and 4 of his subordinates were all arrested and convicted for raping and stalking inmates and tampering with PREA evidence. Mm-hmm. And they did that with the PREA complaint that I filed against Somerset County. I was forced to strip in front of cameras under threat and duress of being maced and extracted. And, I had one of the sergeants telling me to kill myself. She just did that to another inmate, and they had to cut that inmate down from a suicide attempt. So they've let this sergeant continuously terrorize inmates with mental health problems that were in solitary. So I filed a PREA complaint, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act. So anything sexual of a sexual nature goes under PREA. Mm-hmm. I filed this complaint while I was at Alderson. And when they got the response from Somerset County, they wouldn't even let me hold it to read it. They read me the results and said I couldn't have a copy of it. And this is what I'm working with the Maine state legislatures on, because this is how institutions bury the abuse. They'll simply just not give you the paperwork. You have 100 days to file a complaint against an institution after you're let out of jail. Mm-hmm. And the first thing they ask, where's your paperwork? Did you file a complaint? I did, but they won't give it to me. And this is how these institutions just bury all these allegations and, instances of abuse. And even when they've let inmates die. I mean, I watched so many inmates die from, either medical neglect or, overdoses. I mean, a girl went into labor, and the only reason they took her to the hospital is because we threatened a riot. And they told her, if this is the false alarm, you're going to go in the hole. They threatened her with solitary if it was a false alarm. You've had kids. How many times did your wife, think she was going into labor and it was a false alarm? Every woman goes through that, having a baby. I don't care who you are. Like, a contraction hits, and if it's your first time, you're going to think you're having a baby. And for these people to threaten people with solitary confinement, I mean, the psychological damage that, solitary does to people. I mean, when I got out of solitary, people talking over each other would send me into a bad one. Mm-hmm. Like, my first thought was, I'm going to react with violence because I'm so overwhelmed and I feel so threatened. This is what solitary does. It literally slows your brain down so that when it gets overstimulated, because there's no stimulation in solitary. So your brain's like, oh, I'm not using this, so I might as well shut down. So like when normal stimulation happens, when you're not in solitary, it's completely overwhelming. Like, it completely rewires your brain. So, I mean, this is a barbaric thing to do to people. And then you wonder why they get out and they can't function in society.
Or I know about that personally. 2 years in solitary confinement.
Oh God.
Yeah, 2 years. I
My
was
fiance did 18 months and like he still has really bad trauma from it.
well, and it takes work. It takes work. Do I still, yeah, I still have PTSD from it, but also it's a combination of being in the gangs and
Right.
things that you see in prison, right? Um, and I totally agree with everything that you just said. You really just get an in-depth look at how we're actually treated in there. We're treated less than animals for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, the kitchen girls were getting the boxes of food off the truck and it was coming in boxes that said not for human consumption.
Yes.
And then you're wondering why all these people are getting health problems. And, the medical is awful. Like these Republicans love to say, oh, you get free health care in prison and da, 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 da. I watched a girl break her leg on the compound because she had shoveling snow. Like her job was to shovel snow. They waited 3 days and we're in a camp. So we didn't even have fences keeping us in. Like we were there on our own accord. And to take 3 days to bring somebody to a hospital that's that low security, like her bone was fusing back together. They had to re-break her leg
Mm.
because they waited so long. I mean, and then you have these incompetent doctors who just, they don't want to spend money on testing because then that takes away from their Christmas bonus. And, the people aren't getting adequate medical care.
You touched on something about the bonuses. Now, these bonuses, I know inmates, 525 that you were saying, someone were getting paid and someone wasn't even.
$5.25 a
Yeah.
month.
So that added up to a significant number. Are the bonuses being taken away from that since they're using the free labor of the inmates, or
I
so
don't know.
labor?
They profit. Like in Maine, there's they have a welding program.
Mhm.
All the stuff that the inmates weld goes and is sold in a store. And so all these people get to, profit off of cheap inmate labor. And then they had inmates moving dead COVID bodies during the pandemic, getting paid pennies a day. And it's just, it's really repulsive. And at all in the feds, if you don't have your high school diploma, they make you take the GED. That's great if you don't have your high school diploma, but they get $2,000 or I can't, it's like in the thousands for every inmate that is enrolled in the GED. Then they get another $2,000 or whatever the amount is. And after they graduate the GED. But the problem is you had people that had bachelor's degrees and these caseworkers don't want it. They tell you have to have a copy of your diploma. If you don't get a copy of your diploma, they automatically enroll you in the GED.
Mhm.
Well, it was in people's PSIs that they had been to college and everything else, and they were still forcing them to do the GED program. And they were having inmates with bachelor's degrees teach the other inmates, so they could pass their GED. So they were cutting corners, saving money instead of, having real teachers come in. They were just having the inmates with a high education teach these other inmates while they were getting all this funding for inmates getting their GED that already had bachelor degrees. Like it's just one big money scam.
What do you think are some solutions that we need to tackle when it comes down to the addiction, and the racism that's inside of the prison systems?
Right. Well, like I brought this up with this Maine state legislatures. And we talked about this earlier, how LePage went in the media saying that there are all these out-of-state dealers coming up to Maine, flooding our streets with drugs, impregnating our white women. And the truth is, I was a drug dealer. I participated in these things, and
Mhm.
the only reason these out-of-staters came up or knew to come up is because you had white police informants going down and getting them and addicts going down and getting them. And then it made a revolving door for law enforcement with these out-of-state dealers. So they're getting all this funding, they're locking all these Black people up, and it's much bigger charges because they've crossed state lines now.
Mhm.
Like you went down and got these people. Now you're bringing them up here, and now you want to gaslight them, and act like they're just coming up here, on their own accord. No, they came up here because of corruption and because of systematic racism, and you want somebody to blame when it's the system. And he's taking money from pharmaceutical companies for his elections, and sponsors and all that. Like, no, we need to attack the pharmaceutical companies. They're the ones doing this. They're
Mm.
the ones putting out false data to get more prescriptions. And now the doctors, they're all getting locked up. The pharmacies are getting all locked up. That shouldn't be happening. It's not the doctor's fault that the pharmacy companies are giving them false information. And it doesn't help that 94% of these rehabs have a failure rate. 94% failure rate in these rehabs. And
Yes.
then there's no refund. So you kick someone, like my friend's nephew got kicked out for drinking a cup of coffee in the wrong area of the rehab. They told him no refund. They have these petty rules for rehabs for
Mm.
drug addicts who aren't necessarily stable. They're coming off of drugs, and you're going to put these petty rules in place so you can just kick them out and then keep their tuition and then fill that bed. It's free money to them. This, the suffering of the American people is $1 trillion industry, and it's corporate America.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, being a victim of seeing a major overdose, the hardest problem with that was, getting them to be accountable for the mistakes that they make, right?
yeah,
Getting people addicted to drugs, and they should be held accountable for that, because I believe that they have these things already planned out. And when they release them, they already know what's going to happen. And I'm going, you ever see those commercials where they say, if you're ever taking this drug, you should be compensated if you do. I'm like, this is already pre-planned, right? And
yeah.
you look at it and it's like, well, we did this to you. Now we're going to punish you because we did it to you. But
And
getting
the
people,
punishment, we're going to call it
yeah, we're
rehabilitation,
going to
just to
call it
gaslight you some more.
rehabilitation, right? And they force people into, I think a lot of times with these rehab centers, now we do have some good ones. We really do have some really good ones. But the ones that are crap, they're people that's coming out of the system and being forced into these rehabs. Like, it's not voluntary. So I do see the failure rate when it goes down when it's not voluntary, because no one wants to be told what to do, right?
Right.
It's like forcing somebody to do something and then hoping for the best instead of like free will. There's no freedom in that. There's no freedom in that whatsoever.
Right.
So, yeah, what do you think the next step should be for these rehab centers?
Um, I don't think they should be able to just be able to be telling people no refund,
Right,
when they're not treating people.
right,
What does that do? I mean, and I think we need more programs in jail, and get to the root of the problem instead of people just being institutionalized and traumatized. I did the Resolve program in federal prison, and that really helped me. And I wasn't getting high because I couldn't let go of the high. I was getting high because I kept getting triggered in my trauma, and
mhm,
I kept having chronic pain from that head injury. So I had to address those two issues before I could really get sober.
right.
And you know yeah, that Resolve program is absolutely great. It introduced me to meditation, and just it really informed me about what I was dealing with. Like, I mean, you feel like you're crazy all the time
Yes,
because you're having these reactions and you don't understand, where you're coming from. And in your conscious mind, you're not in danger, but your brain is being triggered, and it's, telling you, it's making you irritated or, snappy in your responses because, your brain feels like it's in danger. And, that was like really hard to, overcome and deal with. And the nightmares, I mean, I'd wake up swinging. I mean, every time I went to jail, I head butted the wall at least once, like in my sleep. I mean, it really just takes a toll on you.
I'm glad to say that I'm glad that you survived. I'm glad that you're here and doing the work that you're doing. And you guys will see more of her. You guys will. She has so much more going on. For those who are coming out of prison dealing with opioid or addiction in general, her information will be down below. Check out her artwork, read her article. She has so much more to offer. I'm really excited to see where her journey goes. And with that being said, thank you guys for tuning in another episode of Memories of Us. And if you like the stories like this, be sure to click subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're always notified when we release another episode. And until next time, you guys keep your head up and love you.
Bye.
Bye.